Good. So continuing the series on the world to come, we've discussed so far the end of days, the wars of Armageddon, that's Gog and Magog. We discussed most recently the Torah's teachings on resurrection. And now we've entered the period of the world to come. Regarding the world to come, there are many interesting questions. For example, when is the world to come? When does it take place? Where does it take place? Is it a spiritual plane? Is there any way in which people who wouldn't ordinarily merit the world to come, nevertheless some way in which they could merit going there? And if so, how would that be? That's been discussed insofar as the world to come, at least according to some commentaries, is generally understood as being a physical plane. So how does that actually happen? Who will arise? How will they arise? What will people do after they've already been resurrected? What will the experiences in that resurrected life be like? Will people know each other? Will they communicate with each other? Will they recognize each other? Will there be things like eating and drinking and other types of things? Will there be relationships with people that existed before resurrection? For example, husband and wife, spouses, fathers and children, parents, and so forth and so on. Will all of that exist? And then finally, we'll probably go into a discussion about whether there will be, for example, Torah study in the world to come. Will there be observance of the mitzvot? Will there be any changes? Will it be in any way non-obligatory? So these are the types of things that we're going to want to talk about in these next two installments we have in the world to come. The first thing that we want to talk about then is, when we say the world to come, what do we mean? When is the world to come going to come about, and where is it, for example? So the Rambam says quite clearly that the world to come that is referred to in the teachings of the sages is referring not to some future world, as the name the world to come would seem to imply, the world to come, but rather the Rambam says the world to come is referring to the soul world. A very fond student of mine once explained, it's called the world to come, not because it doesn't exist now and it will in the future, but that rather that's where the soul is going to go after a person dies, after a person passes away. And therefore it's called the world to come because even though it exists concurrently with this world, still a person's soul is not there now, and it will be going there sometime in the future. According to the Rambam, then, the idea of the world to come is really not a physical world at all. It's a spiritual realm. It's a realm where the souls will go, presumably after death, and those souls will experience what we describe usually as heaven, yes, or Gan Eden. The problem with this reading of the Rambam is that it seems to contradict the plethora of teachings we have in the Torah which talk about resurrection, and we've seen them ourselves. How do we reconcile the Rambam's view of the world to come as being a purely spiritual realm when other sources say explicitly the world to come is a world where we have resurrected bodies? So the Ravid on the Rambam himself actually asks this question and says, the words of the Rambam are tantamount to heresy. A denial of the world to come as an expression of resurrection, a reunification of the soul to the body. Now in truth we know that that's not the case. The Rambam is not a heretic. And we discussed in an earlier session how the Rambam himself actually enumerates the belief in the resurrection as one of the 13 principles. So clearly, we have to reconcile what the Rambam writes here with the idea of resurrection. The Kesef Mishnah explains that really there's no difference of opinion here. The Ravid and others all would agree that there is a realm that the soul goes to when a person dies, which we call Gan Eden. And that soul exists there without a body. And certainly there's no eating, there's no drinking, there's no marital relations, no other bodily functions because there are no bodies. Not only that, there's not going to be any negative emotions like jealousy, anger, competitiveness. Rather, people are going to be basking in the glory of God in Gan Eden. On the other hand, the Rambam certainly agrees that there will be a period of resurrection when souls will be returning to bodies, and this world to come will at least take some form in the physical realm. The difference really the Kesef Mishnah makes is only a matter of semantics. What do you call each phase? According to the Rambam, the world to come is what we would call heaven or Gan Eden. Others say no, the term world to come refers to the resurrected world. But they all agree that both exist. It's really a matter of terms. So for simplicity's sake, really, often the distinction is made as follows. The soul world, the world Gan Eden, or heaven, where the soul goes after a person dies, that's referred to as the Olam HaNeshamos, the world of souls, the soul world. As opposed to the world after resurrection, that's called Olam Etchia, the world of resurrection. That being said, there is nevertheless a difference, and it's an interesting difference, that the Rambam says in his treatise on resurrection, which we mentioned yesterday, that the resurrection is really only a temporary period. Interesting position. Only the Rambam holds this. He says that even though the souls will be resurrected into bodies, that will not be the final state. At some point, all of those resurrected bodies that we discussed yesterday will die, and the souls will go back to the soul world. So according to the Rambam, that explains why he says the world to come is really the soul world, because the soul world has two parts. It has a part where the soul goes to when the person departs, and it is present there until it's resurrected. The resurrection takes place. It lasts for a certain period of time, after which time deserving souls will be sent back into that soul world, which is the ultimate final world, and therefore he calls that, let's say, the world to come. Why does the Rambam hold this opinion? What's his reasoning for this? The Rambam seems to be of the opinion that since this is all very closely connected to the idea of reward, a soul cannot be properly awarded when it is in the limitations of its association with a body. So that a person will be resurrected in order for the body, which was the vehicle through which this soul attained its reward, so that the body itself should receive reward as well. And that's going to be the reward that the person has in the soul-body combination after resurrection. But ultimately, since that reward is connected to a person in the physical realm via his body, that reward is necessarily going to be limited as far as the soul is concerned. So therefore, the reward is primarily for the body or the soul-body combination, commensurate to the extent to which the soul and the body work together to attain this reward. But after the body is properly rewarded, the soul is liberated entirely, freed from the constraints of the body, goes into the world to come forever without a body, and there receives its great reward. It's a very logical position. Nobody else seems to hold to that. All of the other opinions, including the Kabbalists, say no, the resurrection is the final stop. The state in which the soul and body live together is the ultimate form of reward. And the explanation that they give is as follows, is that when the body and the soul are together in this worldly terms, the body, in fact, places a limitation on the soul. But a resurrected body, like we saw yesterday, is not going to be a physical body in the sense that we know. It's going to be a purified body, and that body is going to be elevated even more so by the power of the soul that's infused into it. It's going to be like a recreation of mankind, just like Adam and Eve were created before the sin. And initially, their beings were like beings of light, and the angels mistook them for God. They wanted to pronounce holy, holy, holy in front of Adam and Eve. They thought they were like beings of light, like God. So that the resurrection is actually going to be a restoration of mankind back to the level of Adam and Eve before the sin. In which case, those bodies are going to be bodies of light and not bodies of skin. Only as a result of the sin do we see that God gave them garments of skin. What are those garments of skin? It doesn't mean he clothed them with animal skins to cover their nakedness. What it means is he covered their exposed spiritual depravity by enclothing them with skin, physical bodies. Before that, there was also a physical component to the body, but it was so supercharged by the soul that you could barely see it. After the sin, it congealed and took a physical manifestation. You can understand this with a beautiful analogy. Light bulb. If you think about it like a light bulb, when it's off, you see the body of the bulb. And you can see the filament as a structure of wires in it. Yeah? When you turn that light on, you no longer see the body of the bulb at all. You're blinded from seeing the body of the bulb because of the brilliant light that's coming from what you saw initially as a filament. So that the bulb and the filament actually become light and energy. The bulb and the filament are still there, but they become charged with such energy that you no longer relate it to them in the same way. It's here too as well. That resurrected body is going to be so supercharged by the energy of the soul, which is radiating from within, that it's no longer going to be the types of bodies that we know. They're going to be bodies of light. If they have any physicality, it's secluded by the energy that's radiating from within it. And therefore they say that such a body does not limit the reward of the soul. On the contrary, the body-soul combination in that state is like the perfected state. It's the purpose of creation. It represents the return to the state in which God created the world. And therefore, just like God created Adam and Eve with the intention of their staying in the Garden of Eden, because they would have been on that level of perfection, so too resurrection will be the eternal state. God will therefore resurrect the soul and the body to benefit both the body and the soul, and the reward of each does not limit or affect the other. On the contrary, it just compounds each other. And that's going to be the most ideal state. For this reason then, unlike the Rambam, who says that resurrection is not the final phase, they hold that resurrection is the final phase. That represents the achievement of perfection. The pinnacle for, and mankind at that time would become the pinnacle of creation, the reason for which creation came into being. It seems that the Arizal is actually the opinion of the latter. Like I said, Rambam is the only one who has the opinion that resurrection is temporary. All of the other Rishonim and the Arizal, the master Kabbalists, seem to say that resurrection will be the final stage, and it will be a body-soul combination in unity and harmony, where the reward would not be limited because of the soul's connection to the body at all. That being said, so who's going to actually merit this? Who's going to merit this world to come, where after going through the soul world, the soul is then brought back down into the body, resurrected, coming into this world of a perfected state? Obviously, the righteous. The righteous will receive it. And that's why we see in the Talmud, throughout the Talmud, that the righteous are going to inherit the world to come. Yeah. That's kind of mirrored in the Mishnah. There's a Mishnah in Sanhedrin which says, right, Kol Yisrael yesh lem chelek le'olam haba. That seems to imply that every Jew actually has a place in the world to come. The problem is that doesn't seem to be correct, because the same Mishnah goes on to enumerate people who will not merit the world to come. Every Jew has a share in the world to come, the Mishnah says. Then it goes on to say, the following have no share in the world to come. He who says there is no allusion to the Torah and resurrection, somebody who denies resurrection, the Gemara says, will not merit being resurrected. I think we spoke a few days ago about whether cremation bars a person from resurrection. And I made the point that the act of cremation, destroying the body by burning it, would not prevent the actual resurrection from taking place. Like I mentioned, unfortunately, many Jews were burned at the stake as a profession of their state, of their belief in God. And therefore, they would not be barred from resurrection just because of their having been burned. But rather, if there is a problem with cremation and resurrection, it would be into this, that a person who cremates with the idea as an expression that there's no longer any need for this body, it's finished, there's no future use for it, so that cremation is tantamount to denying resurrection. So not the cremation would prevent the resurrection, but its statement denying the person's belief in resurrection would perhaps bar him from resurrection. This is the point here. Anybody who says there is no resurrection will not be resurrected. Or, for example, one who says the Torah was not given by heaven is a heretic. Rabbi Kiva says one who reads books of external wisdom, things that kind of confuse a person from seeing things according to the proper path of belief. And there are other things which are listed there as well. But my point is just this, that from the teaching it would seem that everybody has a portion of the world to come. Then it goes on to say, not everybody has a portion of the world to come. So obviously it can't be everybody. Probably familiar with the actual teaching itself, which says, Kol Yisrael yesh lem chelek le'olam haba, which means to the world to come. It doesn't say in the world to come, but to the world. Every Jew has a path which can potentially lead him to the world to come. Whether every Jew realizes that path or not is a different story. The Rambam writes, that certainly the wicked will not merit the world to come. The Rambam writes in Hilchos Tshuva, when does the statement that such an individual does not have a share in the world to come apply? When he dies without having repented. However, if he repents and he dies a penitent, he will be of those admitted to the world to come. For nothing can stand in the way of tshuva. Even if he denied God's existence all his days, but repented at the end, he has a share in the world to come. Any wicked person, sinner, apostate who repents, whether overtly or in private, is accepted. So according to this, even if a person lives his entire life as somebody who would be barred from the world to come, if he does tshuva, that's certainly a way in. Okay? So the righteous will have a place in the world to come. Even the wicked have a way of getting there. How so? Through tshuva. What about a rasha who never does tshuva? Does he have any hope for attaining the world to come?
Why not?
Because he's wicked and he's never done tshuva. Why, on what basis would he merit going there? So we do find that even wicked people who never do tshuva still have a potential to get to the world to come. And that can take place through the merit of other people. For example, one's children. The Gemara says that a son is like the foot of his father. Right? Bre karu daveh. A son is like the foot of his father. How so? When a father dies, a man dies, he no longer has a body. His soul is in the spiritual realm. There's nothing that person can do, no longer having a body, which would promote his status in the world to come. He's lacking a body. He no longer has a foothold in this world. Only through the foothold of the body that a person has in this world can he do something to gain merit in the world to come. If a person dies wicked without having done tshuva, he loses that foothold. He would seem to have no chance of propelling himself further in the world to come. How does he do so? Through his son. His son, his body, his son, which is an embodiment of himself, gives him a foothold in the world so that the actions of the son can actually work in his benefit, in his merit. There's a midrash which talks about how Rabbi Kiva was once going along the way, and he came across a soul in this world without a body, a disembodied soul, which is called a ghost, an apparition, or in Hebrew, a ruach. So Rabbi Kiva, this midrash tells us, was going a long way, and he saw a ruach. And this ruach was running, frightened. And Rabbi Kiva said, "Stop, what's wrong with me?" He said, "Don't stop me. I'm being chased by angels of fire, which whip me and push me forward." He said, "Why? What have you done?" He said, "Don't bother me. Don't cause me to tarry. It'll just cause my punishment to be even worse." So Rabbi Kiva, as long as he held on to him, said, "Wait a minute, tell me at least, did you leave behind any children?" So he said, as he was running away, "I left behind a pregnant woman." "Where are you from?" "From such a pregnant wife." "Where are you from?" "Such and such a town." And then the spirit disappeared. Rabbi Kiva, the midrash tells us, went to this town and looked after this person and asked about him. And whenever he mentioned, "Where's the home of so-and-so?" anybody who just heard the name of this person spat and had a very negative response. It turned out that this person was wicked, he was a robber, he cheated everybody, and the midrash says that he did the most heinous crime of committing adultery on Yom Kippur. This is how wicked the guy was. Rabbi Kiva finally finds his way to this person's house, and he finds that the person's widow actually had a child, an infant, a son. Rabbi Kiva stayed there in order to raise this son himself and ensured that he had a proper Jewish education. And when he came old enough to pray, Rabbi Kiva set him up to be the Shliach Tzibur, the representative of the community, to pray and lead the minyan. So afterwards, the midrash says that Rabbi Kiva was going on the way, and he saw that spirit. But at this point, the spirit was relaxed and calm and enveloped with life and light. And the spirit said to Rabbi Kiva, "May your mind be at ease because you have caused me and enabled me to be at ease as well." This midrash is used usually as the source for a person saying Kaddish. Rabbi Kiva found this child and had him pray for the community on behalf of his deceased father. So this is the source for the custom of an ovel, a mourner, basically saying Kaddish and usually praying at the Amud, at least during the first year until the Yortzeit. But in any case, you see here how even a wicked person who never did tshuva can still gain access to the world to come through the merit of his children, the children that he leaves behind. However, it doesn't only work that way. We find sources that say it works the other way as well. Sometimes parents can affect the spiritual promotion of their children. Where do we find an example of this? With David and Avshalom. You know that King David had a son, Avshalom. Avshalom means the father of peace, or may my father have peace. We know that Avshalom did nothing like that. He caused his father great sorrows. In fact, he actually designed against his father's life and wanted to kill him. As it turns out, while Avshalom was actually in the act of chasing after his father to kill him, we're told in the verses that this very vain Avshalom, who grew out his beautiful hair very long like a mane, was galloping through a forest after his father to kill him, and his hair, which was flapping and flowing in the wind, came wrapped around the bough of a pistachio tree, pulled him off his horse, and hanged him like that, cracked his neck, and he was hanged that way. Unfortunate. But in any case, we find that the Gemara in Sota, page 10b, discusses this description of the death of Avshalom, the son of David, and King David's response. The Gemara quotes a verse where King David says, "He trembled, and he went up to the upper chamber of the gate, and he wept. And he says as he went," and here I want you to count for yourselves how many times we see the phrase, "my son." Okay? "Oh, my son, Avshalom, my son, Avshalom, would have died in your stead. Oh, Avshalom, my son, my son." And the king covered his face, and the king cried with a loud voice, "Oh, my son, Avshalom, oh, Avshalom, my son, my son." How many times did you count? 8 times. Very good. Yeah? 8 times. The Gemara says, why did David say, "my son," 8 times? 7 times in order to elevate Avshalom from the 7 levels of Gehinnom, and the 8th time in order to get him into Gan Eden, into the world to come. So you see from here, even a wicked person who dies without repenting can still have a path to the world to come without doing tshuva, right? If somebody, like a relative, prays on his behalf. And it works not only from a son to a father, but even from a father to son. And it presumably works through the spiritual connection that exists between them. I can propel that person's spiritual progress because there's a spiritual relationship between me and that person. But we find another source which says that it's related not only to relatives. It can even happen between 2 people who are connected, but not through blood. For example, between a rabbi and his student, or even somebody who's not necessarily a student. The Gemara in Chagiga talks about 4 people who went into the Pardes. You remember? There was Rabbi Akiva, there was Rabbi Elisha ben Avuya, who became known as Acher, and there were 2 others. The Gemara says that of the 4 who had this spiritually uplifting experience, Rabbi Akiva came out unscathed. One died, one became mentally deranged, and another went out of his mind, spiritually speaking, and became a heretic. That was Elisha ben Avuya. The Gemara says about Elisha ben Avuya that because of the things that he saw there and his inability to reconcile them with things that are perceived here, he went into a state of heresy. And the Gemara actually says that he went to hire the services of a woman of ill repute. And she couldn't believe that this rabbi would be willing to hire her for her services. So in order to demonstrate his sincerity, he plucked a turnip out of the ground on Shabbos, which is a Torah prohibition, desecrating the Sabbath. And he says, "Here, you see, I'm willing to do this. I'm willing to do what I'm proposing with you as well." So she says, "Oh, you're no longer the same person. You're an Acher. You're someone else. Acher." So this Acher then went into a state of heresy, and the Gemara discusses what happened to him as a result of that. But ultimately, the Gemara goes on and concludes with the discussion of what happened with him after he died. When Acher died, there was a discussion in the heavenly realm what should happen with him. Should he go to heaven or should he go to hell? Should he go to Geddon? Should he go to Gehinnom? So on the one hand, they say, we can't send him to Gehinnom because he's learned so much Torah in his life. Somebody who's learned so much Torah cannot go to Gehinnom. On the other hand, we can't send him to Gan Eden because he became a heretic. So what do? Ultimately, he was like in a state of limbo until the Gemara tells us that his main disciple, who was Rabbi Meir, says, this situation is intolerable. It can't go on this way. Better that he go to Gehinnom and then ultimately have a chance to go to to Gan Eden, than that he should remain in the state of spiritual limbo. The Gemara says, as a result of this, when Rabbi Meir died himself, smoke started coming out of the grave of Acher, implying that when Rabbi Meir died, he went into the spiritual realm and was able to start catalyzing the forward moving of Acher's soul, so that he was elevated from nothingness, at least into Gehinnom, and smoke started coming out of the grave. Rabbi Meir had a Talmud, I believe it was his Talmud, who was Rabbi Yochanan. And Rabbi Yochanan saw this and says, what's this business? A student sends his rabbi to Gehinnom? The grave is smoking like this? He says, when I die, the smoke's going to stop. I'm going to send him to Gan Eden. And that's what happened. Eventually the Gemara says that Rabbi Yochanan died, and on that day that Rabbi Yochanan died, smoke started coming out of the grave of Acher, implying that his stint in Gehinnom was completed, and he was elevated into Gan Eden. Yeah? So you see from here, not only does it work from son to father, or father to son, blood relatives, but even people who have another type of spiritual connection, like Talmud to Rabbi. Parenthetically, there's an interesting discussion here. Why is it that Rabbi Yochanan was able to get Acher into Gan Eden, whereas Rabbi Meir, who was the Talmud of Acher, was not able to? He could only get him as far as Gehinnom. What was going on there? So I saw a very interesting explanation, which is based as follows. We find that there's a teaching in the Talmud that says, anybody who says, I can't learn because of poverty, he doesn't have an alibi. Why? Because Hillel was extremely poverty-stricken, and look how much Torah he learned. So the same thing applies here. It would seem that Acher had an alibi. The Tosfos there explains that why, among the reasons are given for Acher's becoming a heretic. Why is this? It says because his mother ate the meat of idolatrous offerings when she was pregnant with him. What's that all about? And where it says elsewhere that what happened was that when Acher's mother was pregnant with him, she went by some roasting avodah zarah meat, and she had an overwhelming desire to eat that meat. And that desire is viewed as being dangerous to the mother and the infant. And there's a special dispensation allowing her to eat prohibited meat in order not to have her or her infant come into harm. And she was able to eat that meat. But it nevertheless had a negative effect on her that it spiritually made her fetus tainted. As a result, that's what caused, or that's one of the reasons given as to why Acher became susceptible to heresy, because of that. Now you might think he should have an alibi. Oh, it's not my fault I did this because of what happened when I was an infant. But there was another rabbi whose mother was in a similar scenario and also ate forbidden meat for a similar reason. And who was that? Rabbi Yochanan. As long as Rabbi Yochanan was around, Acher didn't have an alibi. We're going to say, Acher, it's because of your mother eating forbidden meat. Look at Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi Yochanan is really the only one who could have properly spoke on behalf of Acher in order to get him into the Olam Haba. And this was explained, for example, why Rabbi Yochanan was able to do effect more for Acher than his own Talmud, Rabbi Meir, was. In any case, these would all be very interesting scenarios where even if a person does not do tshuva, he can still merit the world to come. There are other interesting questions as well. What about somebody who has kares? God forbid, he does a transgression whose punishment is kares. What's kares? Karet is being spiritually cut off. Being spiritually cut off. There are some transgressions which are so severe that that unlike the death penalty or even Misudei Shemayim, the death decreed by heaven, where after the death the person can actually be perfected, here he's cut off. Karet, he's separated. So what are these people going to do about the world to come? Do they have any chance to get to the world to come? So there are some interesting explanations here. And one of it is based on the Nefesh HaChaim, and he basically writes as follows, is that there are 5 levels of soul, as you probably are aware. There's Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, and Yechidah. We only find that Karet is applied to Nefesh. Like it says, Hikaret tikaret ha-nefesh ahi. Whenever we find the punishment of karet, it's always in association with nefesh. So the Nefesh HaChaim explains, not the Nefesh HaChaim, I mean to say the Nishus HaChaim, explains that kares applies only to nefesh. But ruach, neshama, chaya, and yechidah will not be tainted by the transgressions for which kares applies. And therefore, according to this, a person might have a presence in the world to come without nefesh. I'm not quite sure how that would work, but perhaps the other levels of soul could somehow bring about the rectification of nefesh as well, so that it could eventually be redeemed. According to this, karet on the nefesh would only be temporary. But since the main aspect of soul, the higher levels of soul, remains intact, they can somehow ultimately bring nefesh back into the cycle. The Arizal gives another very interesting explanation, which is as follows. He says, based on this idea that kares is specifically on the nefesh is associated with the body, which would mean that kares would be associated via the nefesh to a specific body. So that the only thing that would get kares would be the body of a particular person who did such a transgression. However, that soul would later be reincarnated, according to Jewish belief, into someone else, and someone else, and someone else. Any body associated with the soul, where that body did not do anything associated with karet, would merit resurrection and going into the world to come. When would karet apply then? Specifically to the body of the person, right, who did that act. So that body would never be resurrected. But the other bodies that soul occupied would. They could be resurrected. The last thing that we want to try and talk about today, before we have to break, is what is it going to be like, the experience of actually arising in the world to come. What's going to actually happen there? So there is an interesting teaching in the Zohar, which talks about how when a person is resurrected, the bones will come, as we saw yesterday in the verse, bone to bone, and the body will come together, sinew to sinew, muscle to muscle. But there will be a great singing forth, the Zohar says. And it's based on the verse in Tehillim which says, Kol atzmoisai tamarna Hashem mi kamocha. All of my bones will call out and praise you, God, and say, who is like you? So the Zohar says, did anybody ever hear bones singing? Bones don't sing. Rather, the Zohar said, this is a reference to resurrection. The first thing that's going to happen when those bodies are finally brought back to life is that people are going to break out in song and praise to God. That's one source. Another source is a Midrash in Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, and there the suggestion is that there's a specific bracha that a person makes on resurrection. What's this based on? The teaching which talks about how when Avram took Yitzchak to the Akedah for sacrifice, he raised the knife over Yitzchak. Yitzchak saw that knife poised over him, and just before he thought he would be shechted, his soul left his body, and he died. Right? He actually died. The angel said, is this the reward of such a tzaddik who was about to sacrifice his life for you? And rather than living up to that challenge, he dies? So the soul was returned back to the body, and the Midrash says, when Yitzchak came back to life, he made a bracha. What bracha did he make? Mechaya Mesim. Blessed are you, Lord of God, who resuscitates the dead. So according to this, the resurrected bodies are going to be first singing out praise to God. Hallelujah. What an amazing thing we've just experienced and witnessed in front of our own eyes, resurrection. And then they're going to say, Mechaya Mesim. The Gemara in Brochos, page 58b, actually talks about when a person has not seen his friend for more than 30 days have elapsed since the last time he saw his friend, you make a bracha. Right? You make a bracha. What's the bracha? Shechianu, Vikimanu, Vigianu, Lezman Hazeh. I'm so happy to see you. Yeah? And there's a question about whether this bracha applies nowadays. If you haven't seen a very close friend of yours, right, for more than 30 days, whether you should make this bracha or not. There's also discussion whether talking on the phone or Skyping in between affects that, and it would seem to. But in any case, if a person was totally out of contact with a close friend for a significant amount of time, he makes the bracha, Shechianu. The word goes on to say, if he hasn't seen his friend for more than 12 months, he makes the bracha, Mechayeh Mesim. Right? I've missed you so much, we've been so disconnected, that as far as I'm concerned, a whole year has lapsed, it's like you're being brought back from the dead for me. Yeah? So if, while we're alive in this world, you make the bracha Shechianu or Mechayeh Mesim over people you haven't seen for a few months or for a year, all the more so upon resurrection, people are going to be breaking out in song, making the bracha Shechianu or Mechayeh Mesim, not only on the resurrection, but as a result of the joy of seeing one another after a lapse of so many years in the grave. And it's an interesting discussion. Another thing that's discussed is what's going to happen, what's the role of judgment in the world to come? Yeah? We do find that the period of the world to come is described in the form of the great day of judgment. The question is, what's being judged? What's actually taking place there? So the Ramban points out that there are 3 times that a person is judged. One is Rosh Hashanah. At the end of every year, a person is judged. Another time is at the end of his life, when he goes into the heavenly realm. Okay? He's judged there. The third time is the period of resurrection. That period of resurrection, the judgment of the period of resurrection, is what's referred to by the verses as that great day of judgment. The Abarbanel, who's another great commentary, he wrote a book called Ma'anei Yeshua, which we discussed, we mentioned yesterday, says that this really doesn't seem to make sense. Why? Because when a person dies, the soul goes to the spiritual realm, right? It either goes to heaven, Gan Eden, or Gehenna. In Gehenna, it's judged, right? By the time resurrection takes place, those souls which are judged in Gehenna will have already gone to Gan Eden, and therefore their judgment takes place. As far as the body is concerned, the body separates from the soul, it's buried, and it undergoes decomposition. That's its judgment. So by the time resurrection comes about, what's there to judge? The soul's already been judged, and the body's all been judged independently before resurrection takes place. If they both merit resurrection, there'll be a unification of the soul and the body, but their judgment has passed. What type of judgment, he therefore asks, would be applicable at this time? So he says the great day of judgment associated with the resurrection is not referring to the righteous, those who are resurrected and righteous. Rather, the great day of judgment is referring, as we mentioned yesterday, to those non-Jews who persecuted the Jewish people, or those Jews who themselves were wicked apostates, where, according to certain sources, they'll be resurrected in order to see what they're missing. They scoffed and they persecuted. Now they'll see that the Jewish people will finally be vindicated. Those righteous Jews or righteous Gentiles, those who are righteous and were scoffed and persecuted, they will be resurrected, and the others will be judged, and they'll see, this is the folly of our actions. The Arizal makes a similar type of an explanation, and there seems to therefore be a type of contradiction here in the sources. According to the Ramban, yes, the judgment is taking place on those who are resurrected. Like he said, the end of the year, Rosh Hashanah, the end of one's life, and then the end of the world as we know it. These 3 concluded periods are times of judgment. The others seem to say, no, as far as the righteous Jews are concerned, there should be no judgment that takes place then. What's going on there? So the Nishmas Chaim gives a very, very interesting explanation, and this is connected to something that we saw yesterday as well, which is, if you remember, we spoke about the idea of resurrection and what's going to happen to the people who are alive at the time of the resurrection. Anybody who already died will be resurrected. Even the righteous who died and their bodies did not decompose because of their righteousness will also automatically, instantaneously disintegrate so that they'll be resurrected anew with a new, fresh body. But what about those people who are alive at the time of resurrection? What's going to happen to them? So we saw the sources saying that they will have to undergo a instantaneous death, decay, and then reconstitution. So that anybody who's resurrected into that perfected state will have a purely perfected body. So the Nishmas Chaim says that's where the judgment comes in. It's going on those people who died as a result of resurrection, and their judgment was never properly concluded because of the soul being in the Gan Eden and their body having been buried. So that will be the great day of judgment. So according to this, it actually works out. At the end of one's year, Rosh Hashanah, at the end of one's life, when he goes to the heavenly court, and at the end of the world as we know it, the judgment will be upon those people who were alive at that time and have to die and be resurrected. They'll go through that judgment in order to ascertain who will actually merit the resurrection and who will not. A last very interesting question which we want to cover is, what about impurity from death? Meaning tumas mes. We're talking in the end of the day here about dead bodies. And these dead bodies are being brought back to life. Will those dead bodies, which are dead and brought back to life from the dead, will they themselves have tumas mes, or will they not? Will they have to be sprinkled by the red heifer, for example, or will they not? So the Gemara actually asked this question. It's a Gemara in Nida, page 69, where the men of Alexandria asked Rabbi Yeshua ben Hananiah, will the resurrected dead need to be sprinkled with the purifying waters of the red heifer, or will they not? So the Gemara is not sure. The Gemara doesn't give a conclusive answer. Rather, the commentaries address this point. One of them is the Marsha. And the Marsha makes the following point. He says that if the body is fully decayed before resurrection, then any impurity of death goes off it. It's no longer tamei mes. Okay? So if the body is reconstructed from the dust, it should certainly not be impure. Why? The tumas mes applies to the body. When the body decomposes, the tumah goes off. And therefore, the reconstructed body from the dust is going to be pure. He says if there's a question about whether the body will become impure or not, it's through its connection to the loose bone. If you remember yesterday, we spoke about how the constructed body is coming from this special loose bone. That loose bone, if it never decomposes, is going to maintain its degree of tumah. So that any part of the body which comes and is constructed onto that bone, by virtue of the fact that it's touching it, would become impure. Anything that touches it would become impure. Anything that it would become impure. So that's going to be the Gemara's question here. Are these resurrected bodies, in fact, reconstructed from a decomposed body, including the decomposition or the loose bone, or does the loose bone remain intact? And we saw yesterday there are different opinions about whether that loose bone is actually intact or the body comes from the decayed remains. And that would be the question of the Gemara, which the Gemara doesn't actually have a good answer for. We don't know for sure whether that loose bone remains intact, which would result in the resurrected body being impure, or whether it's decomposed, in which case it wouldn't. The Chazon Sofer also gives an interesting explanation about this, and he says the answer to this question is actually kind of based on the following, which is when the resurrected body comes back to life, does each piece of the body become alive as it's reconstructed? Or is the whole body constructed and only at the end does it come to life? And the difference would be as follows. Since the body is reconstructed from the loose bone, yes, it would be a state of impurity. Well, no, that's not the point. Even if it's not coming from the loose bone. As this body is being constructed, yeah, if it's coming to life piece by piece, so any new piece, yes, which is added, is going to be dead, come in contact with, right, a live part. And the live part will therefore become impure because of its contact with the dead part. And as a result of that, each new part is going to become impure because of its contact with the previous part. However, if the whole body is constructed all at once, and the soul comes in at the very end, so that body has been constructed piece by piece, and when the soul comes in, it's going to be pure. Right? So these are the different ways of looking at the question, what's actually going to happen to this resurrected body? Is it going to be impure or impure? According to the Gemara's answer, we don't really know what will happen. We'll have to see when we get there. But these commentaries are trying to actually explain what's the reasoning behind what's actually going to happen. So these are some interesting questions about what's going to happen during the initial phases of resurrection. First of all, we discussed where is the world of resurrection, when is the world of resurrection, who's going to merit going there. And if a person did not live their life in a way which should independently merit their going there, is there nevertheless any way that could be rectified? And we spoke about how it can be rectified through leaving relatives or friends behind, or students and the like. And even such severe transgressions like kares can still be overcome depending on how we understand the nature of kares and it's being specifically associated with the body. Yeah? And not the soul, or one body as opposed to the body of other reincarnations. We also spoke about what's actually going to happen when the souls arise, breaking forth in song and praise over the miraculous resurrection that they're seeing, making brachas, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam mechayei mesim, and singing song. And we also saw what's going to happen regarding the discussion of the initial formulation of the body piece by piece. What we're going to cover next time we meet is what's going to happen afterwards, once these bodies are already reconstituted. Will relationships be reforged? For example, between husband and wife, between parents and children? That will have interesting ramifications regarding whether the bodies interact with each other, for example, in the context of marriage or not. And that'll touch on the question about whether there's eating or drinking or other bodily functions in the world to come. And we're also going to discuss whether there is going to be things like mitzvah observance in the world to come, and if so, to what extent, and also whether there will be Torah learning. What role is Torah going to play in the world to come? And that's what we'll continue with next time we meet. Bezrat Hashem.